A very good evening to you all, and welcome to St. Martin in the Fields, as well as being the Christian Aid annual lecture. This is the 9th lecture in the autumn lecture series for St. Martin in the Fields. Among the many crossovers and things that Christian Aid and St. Martin in the Fields have in common is a profound conviction that out of adversity, some of the greatest truths can be found and can be revealed. It was during the First World War that Dick Shepherd, my predecessor but plenty as Vicar of St. Martin's, began the work with homeless people, which carries on to this day and is a big reason for the reputation St. Martin's has, not only in London but much further afield. It was the gift of the soldier going to the front who had nowhere to spend the night before that momentous journey, from which of course many never returned. That became the gift that has kept on giving for well over 100 years now to this community. And in just a similar way, it was out of the ashes of the refugee crisis at the end of the Second World War that Christian Aid came to be founded, and the same insights of those whom others saw as a burden were received by this organization as a gift that became the core of the ethos that has made Christian Aid such an inspiring organization for all these years. What's different about this lecture series, Here I Stand, I Can Do No Other, is that rather than approach public figures simply to invite them to draw matters to our attention from the many challenges the world faces, it has been also an invitation to speak from their own heart about how they have come to find themselves able to do no other, able to stand on this ground regardless of what other people might say about them, regardless of the consequences to their own well-being. And it's because of her such commitment that we are overjoyed to welcome the Deputy Secretary General this evening. I'm going to hand over to the CEO of Christian Aid to give her a formal welcome, but I want to finish by saying how proud I am that these two organizations are partnering so closely together in a series that is not just about what the hand can do, but what the heart and the head most sincerely believe in. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sam. So I'd like to thank St. Martin in the Fields for all the support you give our work, and for again generously offering to host this annual lecture. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everybody here this evening. It's good to see so many people coming out to listen to the Deputy Secretary General, Christian Aid supporters, people from our sponsoring churches, friends from across public life, in Parliament, government and civil society. So my name is Patrick Watt and I'm the Chief Executive of Christian Aid. So I'm delighted that we have with us here this evening Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, who is not only Deputy Secretary General but also Chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. Now, before I introduce her properly, I wanted to briefly outline the format of the event. So after we've heard the lecture, my colleague Osai Ajigo, who is just behind me, will kickstart the conversation with the Deputy Secretary General. And the floor will then be open to all of you. So please do think about any questions you might like to ask while the initial conversation is taking place. And please also note that this evening's event is being live streamed, so if you ask a question, you will be on camera. And if you would like to post about this evening's event on social media, please use the hashtag CALecture23, CA and L in the uppercase. So, this is Christian Aid's third annual lecture. And when we embarked on our annual lectures 3 years ago, we wanted really to provide an opportunity for a diverse group of people to meet, to be stimulated by a distinguished speaker, and to be encouraged to think together about the major challenges facing our world in relation to Christian Aid's mission and goals. Now, it hardly needs saying that we're holding today's event in the context of a formidable set of challenges. Last year, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy MP, spoke to us forcefully about the importance of multilateral engagement and the need for global solutions to what he described as the world's three greatest challenges: climate change, conflict, and hunger. It's therefore fitting that tonight Her Excellency Amina Mohammed joins us to address one of these challenges in her lecture, Here I Stand, Women's Advancement and Role in Tackling Climate Change. And she joins us having spent today at a UK government conference focused on the second of that trinity of issues identified by David Lammy: hunger, food security, and nutrition. And we, of course, cannot and must not ignore the third challenge of conflict, not least at this moment, when over 2 million people in Gaza face a grave humanitarian crisis. For Christian Aid, an organization that exists to tackle the scandal of extreme poverty, climate change matters because it is already undoing economic and social gains in some of the poorest communities around the world, where people are least equipped to manage its effects. And as an organization committed to just relationships, it matters because the people first and worst affected are those who have contributed least to the problem. The climate crisis is perhaps the ultimate wicked problem, requiring both personal change and collective action at the local and global levels. You could say that it's a prime example of the kind of challenge for which, in order to respond, you would need to invent the United Nations if it didn't already exist. It's therefore especially appropriate that tonight we're joined by the Deputy Secretary-General, who in her first address to that body said, "Solutions from the past will not alone meet the challenges of the future." And as the UN Sustainable Development Goals remind us, our approach to climate and to the natural environment is deeply interwoven with the challenge of how to create a world in which every person is able to flourish, regardless of who they are or where they live. These are themes which Her Excellency Amina Mohammed will touch on as she discusses the impact of climate change on women and girls, reflecting on why it's vital to focus on their advancement and leadership in accelerating green, resilient, and inclusive development. So allow me to say something about our speaker. So Her Excellency Amina Mohammed was formerly the Minister of Environment of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where she steered the country's effort on climate action and efforts to protect the natural environment. She began her career working on the design of schools and clinics in Nigeria and served as an advocate focused on increasing access to education and other social services before moving into the public sector, where she rose to the position of advisor to 4 successive Nigerian presidents on poverty, public sector reform, and sustainable development. She first joined the UN in 2012 as a special advisor to the former SG Ban Ki-moon on post-2015 development planning and was instrumental in bringing about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the creation of the SDGs. Her Excellency has spent her professional life meeting some of the world's most intractable crises and development challenges head on. She believes passionately in the need to accelerate our efforts for a resilient and sustainable future. There are far too many achievements to list in full here, but I will mention a few. She has been conferred several honorary doctorates, is an adjunct professor in development practice at Columbia University, the recipient of various global awards, and serves on numerous international advisory boards, including the development program of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the African Women's Millennium Initiative, and the ActionAid International Right to Education project. She's also the mother of 6 children and has 4 grandchildren. Speaking at a youth forum hosted by UN Women a few years ago, she said, "My job description is simple: to build a world where every boy and girl has the tools and support to make their dreams a reality." We are so grateful that she has time to join us this evening, especially just a few days before COP28 in Dubai. Allow me to welcome Her Excellency Amina Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and we do go back away when we were activists for education. So it's wonderful to be here with you, and thank you to St. Martin in the Fields for inviting me. And wow, it's great to be back in the church again. My grandfather on my maternal side was a Presbyterian minister of the church, and when we were kids, we'd sit at the back and he would talk about all the things we did that were wrong. So today, not going to get a sermon that I remember him speaking to, but a UN speech. It really is a pleasure to be here, and it is at the Church of the Open Door. And goodness me, doesn't this world not need more open doors? A church that has welcomed people of diverse faiths and nationalities and walks of life. A church that has over the years been a steadfast companion in the fight for justice. Justice, or perhaps injustice, is at the heart of the topic that we're going to be having to discuss this evening. But let me pause here to remember that as we speak, we have the suffering of those in Gaza that continues, and in Israel, by those who lost family and friends on October the 7th, by the terrorist attack of Hamas, by those that were taken hostage and have, we hope, live in hope for their families and friends to be returned, but also the 4,000 children that Israel, in the effort to defend itself, have lost their lives. I think it's an important moment for us to remember that as we speak today about women and climate, that we also have to speak to our humanity, not necessarily the rights and the wrongs for those we have the laws, whether they are faith or they're in the United Nations, but every now and again we lose our way. And I think that we have lost our way, and so I hope that each and every one of us can find those bridges and the pathways to peace so that many more can enjoy what we take for granted here this evening. For the discussions we have tonight, we're confronting 2 egregious wrongs. First, climate, an existential threat to humanity. But here we see climate, man-made, destroying the only home that we have. And I have said in the past, when there were less women in leadership, that it is man-made. They were in leadership as we got onto fossil fuels, so we need more women in leadership to ensure that we can tackle climate change. We have certainly wrought a fight that only climate is winning, and we are not. We have done this in the full knowledge of what we're doing, and we do have tools at our disposal to take a different path. When you think about that, it's mind-boggling. A small number of countries, largely the wealthiest, have overwhelmingly caused this problem. Intentionally or otherwise, it has become an existential threat to us all. 1/2 of our world has grown rich from guzzling fossil fuels, attaining a standard of living that remains a remote dream for the other half of the world. Analysis from Oxfam in 2020 found that someone in the UK took just 5 days to emit the same carbon as someone in Rwanda does in an entire year. But as our climate becomes less stable and more dangerous, causing fires and floods and droughts that can wipe out development gains in a moment, who suffers most? the poor and the vulnerable, those that have done the very least to cause the crisis. Vulnerable countries such as small island states risk being overrun by rising sea levels. Over 40,000 people were killed in recent droughts in Somalia, a country that emits a tiny fraction of global emissions. The economic damage resulting from climate disasters is mounting across the world, not to mention the lives that have been lost and the communities destroyed as climate change pushes people from their homes. Meanwhile, we have a debt crisis that is engulfing much of the global south. Africa today spends more on servicing its debts than it does on healthcare and education. And developing countries are paying far more for capital than developed ones, even when they have a better case and a better macroeconomic fundamental. This creates huge obstacles to investing in green solutions like clean energy or protecting people from the escalating climate extremes. And I ask you to imagine what this looks like from the lens of the global south. It looks like what it is, a horrific injustice on a global scale with women taking the brunt. And as a woman from Africa, I experienced firsthand the suffering of women and girls in Lake Chad, Nigeria, where climate change has hit hard. Friends, the second injustice we are considering is the status of women. We live in a male-dominated patriarchal world, from heads of state to government to boardrooms. And it's worth being explicit about what this means, because something we are so used to seeing can become invisible. This is a world in which women have been slaves and chattel and continue to be trafficked, a world in which women are beaten and raped in conflict, as we see in Darfur and Sudan as we speak. As I saw in Chad when I visited refugees that were coming across the border from Sudan, 11 checkpoints, and in each one of them, women and girls beaten and raped. A world where women face harassment, threats, and abuse on social media. A world where women are denied power, property, and even the right to learn, as we see in Afghanistan. Globally, for every dollar earned by men, women earn just 51 cents. Despite making up more than half the world's population, women make up just over a quarter of our parliamentary seats, and nearly half of married women are unable to make their own choices about their sexual and reproductive health, denying them their rights. This is not to say womanhood equals victimhood. Rather, it is to say that we have marginalized and excluded the experiences of half of our humanity, and the consequences are being felt by all. The political and economic models around which we have organized have been informed by only a few. And when we place a $0 value on the hours of work that sustain families and communities, as well as on the planet and natural resources that sustain us, it has become a common root cause and a common outcome. That outcome is inequality, it's an imbalance, and it's exploitation. But while women have throughout history had their voices, agency, and experience marginalized, wherever women are today, they are claiming their space. We see across the globe women taking the lead, fighting for their rights, and creating real change through their leadership. Examples of Nobel Peace Prize laureates such as Malala Yousafzai and Narges Mohammadi, and a young climate activist like Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Nakati. They dedicate their lives and stand at the vanguard of the global fight for human rights, human dignity, and climate change. Leaders like Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, whose leadership in the Bridgetown Initiative on financing development, and a first mover in locking the Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund of the IMF in record time. We also have the exemplary courage of the late Wangari Maathai, demonstrating the power of local solutions to the nexus issues of nature, climate, and poverty. Gender equality is the foundation of a just society and integral to meeting the commitments countries made in each of the Sustainable Development Goals. Over the decades, there has been undeniable progress. More women than ever hold political decision-making posts worldwide. Nearly 90 million women of working age have gained legal equality in the last decade. But we need to move much faster to achieve gender equality around the world to meet those promises that we made for 2030. Friends, these two wrongs magnify one another. While the climate crisis affects everyone, it does not affect everyone equally. Climate chaos can make women and girls poorer, more unequal, and less safe. And we hear women are 14 times more susceptible to death or injury during climate-related natural disasters compared to men. And as 2023 is set to become the warmest on record, the 2023 UN Women and DESA gender snapshots warn us that hundreds of millions more women and girls are at risk of poverty and food insecurity. We heard that again at the UK Summit on Food Security this afternoon. Researchers have also found root causes to child marriage more common when water is scarce. Lower crop yields and higher food prices put family under pressure as they fall into abject poverty. We also know that the drivers of violence against women are complex, and that climate-induced stress of displacement, insecurity, and poverty can play a role. The question we must ask ourselves is why. Women experience these stresses as or even more acutely, but it is not women who respond to them with violence. This means that we have to start from today, calling out this violence for what it is, shifting attitudes and behaviors, mindsets. We must start to prevent violence and cycles of ongoing, exacerbated in many cases by climate, the context in which many poor live today. Many women work disproportionately in industries vulnerable to climate disasters, where their livelihoods face significant risks. For example, a quarter of women around the world work in agriculture, exposing them to the impacts of extreme weather events and the shifting conditions, and therefore the loss of their livelihoods. So it is no wonder that runaway climate change is projected to push even more women than men into poverty. Already we see the averages 3 times as much. But as temperatures rise, those hours do too. Our changing climate can make water and firewood scarce, and for example, exacerbating unpaid work for women and girls, or walking longer hours to find these resources. That means less time for education, less time for paid work, and involvement in climate action. In fact, in these times of stress, girls are often forced to abandon their schooling and their aspirations. And that is a blow to gender equality now and in the future. How should we respond to these interrelated wrongs? First and foremost, we need to get a grip on the climate crisis and to right some of the injustices that are inherent in them. Big emitters like the UK need to lead, including at the next UN climate conference in less than 2 weeks, COP28. We need all countries to put into practice the acceleration agenda that has been proposed by the UN Secretary General. It's based on evidence, on what the experts and the scientists tell us we must do to avoid the very worst of climate change by limiting the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It calls on governments to accelerate their net zero timelines so that when they can get there as soon as possible, 2040 in developed countries and 2050 in emerging economies. It urges them to deal with the root causes of the crisis, fossil fuels. The acceleration agenda also calls on governments to commit to no new coal, to end the licensing or funding of new oil and gas. In the last few months, we have seen 4 countries, from the UK to Canada to Norway to the US, issuing over 100 concessions in oil and gas. We need to see the shift of subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables and a just energy transition. The UK has shown climate leadership in the past, and so we urge everyone to build on that, including at COP28, by helping to secure an agreement that signals the end to the fossil fuel age around the world. We can no longer rely on the trading schemes and unproven technologies just to remove the carbon from the atmosphere. Fossil fuels themselves need to go, and that means a just but an equitable transition for everyone. It means that at COP28, the agreement that we need to boost renewables and energy efficiency and to bring power to all by 2030, as well as commitments to phase out and not phase down fossil fuels. The UK has a role to play in addressing climate injustice, lending its leadership to the global stocktake. Developing countries need to support to protect themselves from the damages that are being wrought by climate chaos. These are important meetings, and women will play a critical role in the movements that will come from civil society, from governments, from small island states, from science, from technology. 2 years ago, here in the UK at COP26 in Glasgow, countries committed to double the finance provided for climate adaptation. This allows opportunities for women to take up leadership and to be invested in. At COP28, we need to see a clear plan for how that will be achieved. Last year, miraculously, countries agreed to a new loss and damage fund to help deal with the destruction caused by extreme weather over the centuries, but in particular for small island development states. Countries recently agreed on the design and operation of this fund. This is excellent news. From COP27 to COP28, to actually have put a fund in place and to operationalize it is something we haven't done in many years and therefore gives a lot of hope. Now we need the generous early pledges from developed countries and those with the means to get it off to a strong start. Friends, we have to put a focus on women as we tackle the climate crisis. We cannot say that enough. Climate action can reinforce gender injustice, or it can address it. It can overlook women and girls, or it can consider their needs and ensure they benefit equally and bring them into the heart of decision-making. And of course, it can support the fantastic work women around the world are already doing to respond to the climate crisis. Taking the latter path is not a favor to women, or even solely a matter of obvious justice. It is a basic right for women. It is simply more effective, but it also delivers more for the whole of society. Research is showing us that women's participation in climate action and leadership has led to better results, better conservation outcomes, and greater preparedness for disasters. Around the world, there are numerous examples of women leading emission reductions and boosting their communities and resilience. Yet, only 55 of the world's national climate action plans include gender-specific adaptation measures, and only 23 recognize the vital role of women as change agents in the fight against climate change. Women are powerful agents of change, and we have examples we see around the world. What we do need to do is to take them to scale. Increasing women's representation in national parliaments is shown to lead to more stringent climate change policies for everyone. It's therefore imperative to support women's participation and decision-making, and to reflect their needs in programming and in design. A good starting point is to build the capacity of women's organizations to lead, advocate, and participate in climate action, including policy-making and resilience building. Currently, they struggle for funds. Between 2018 and 2019, $19 billion of climate finance from OECD members addressed gender equality, but just 43 million of that went to feminist and women's rights organizations, so less than 0.25%. Often these groups find it difficult to access multilateral climate finance, which are oriented towards large multi-million-dollar projects. We are only as good as the treatment of the smallest and most vulnerable person of our family. We need to ensure women and girls benefit equally from the transition away from fossil fuels. So when we say equal, we say with equality and justice, this should have women at the center. But all of this is not assured, and currently 80% of jobs created by decarbonization will be in sectors that are dominated by men. We have to give this considerable thought. Women make up just 14% of senior managers in the renewable sector and 5% of top posts such as CEOs. That too has to change. That space must be opened up for the competencies and the leadership of women. But unless we're proactive in advancing gender justice as we make a clean transition, we risk reproducing the same old divides. What does this look like in practice? First, we need countries, climate action plans and policies to consider gender equality, particularly for a just transition. 10 of our 65 countries that reference a just transition in their national climate action plans link it to gender. Second, we should tackle gender equality in work to support a just transition. It requires a conversation, discussions on how we do that in real practice. That means speaking from the global level with those at the local level who do know what it feels and what it means to have climate injustice. It also means supporting girls and women access to training and skills so that they build most of the new jobs as we move to clean economies. It means improving the terms and conditions for women's care. We need to expand greater gender-responsive financing for climate action. We have been speaking about this with Prime Minister Motley for the last few years. It includes increasing direct access for women's organizations and prioritizing funding for women and girls most effective. We must build the momentum in our communities from all those stakeholders, all those who support us in this room, outside of this room, and the world around to create that momentum for change. The Women's Climate Fund that has just been developed by UN Women is designed to galvanize gender-responsive financing and support just transitions to clean economies, including by providing fast and flexible funding, civil society, but civil society at the grassroots and feminist organizations. It's currently seeking much of the seeding funding from governments and donors, and I urge you to spread this message because it is important that there is ownership in countries. The generosity of those around the world is much appreciated, but the sustainability of funding these fights for rights really is at the country level, and we need to see governments taking ownership and responsibility. Next year, the G20 presidency moves to Brazil, and as COP30 and G20 chair, Brazil will first the host meeting on the G20 Working Group on the Empowerment of Women, which aims to support countries as they continue to address gender inequality. I was in Brazil not long ago in the Amazon, and it was amazing to see that those that were leading the indigenous movements and the fight for gender equality and climate justice in Brazil were young women. And they were bringing young men with them. And I think this is encouraging. It's not just about women. We have to do this together. But today, as we stand, we see women so far behind. The creation of the working group in India of the working group for women, the empowerment of women, really has put it on the leaders' agenda. But it is up to all of us to hold our leaders accountable. Many in this room, as I have spoken to much of the challenges that we face, there are, of course, the potentials. But in the end, it is about us holding our leaders accountable in parliaments, in businesses, in science and technology, in the way and manner in which our programs are designed and are implemented. Faith organizations and civil society can play vital roles in advancing these aims and tackling joint injustices of gender and climate. We know your power. I certainly have seen the power of faith in many of our countries. Just down the road from here in Parliament Square, Millicent Fawcett declares that courage calls to courage everywhere, reminding us of the strength of women's leadership in the fight for equality. And faith organizations have often been at the heart of development and poverty reduction. Indeed, for many of us, this is at the core of our faiths. Jesus taught his followers to seek justice for the oppressed. Zakah is a central pillar of my own faith in Islam. Around the world, faith organizations are putting their beliefs into action and fighting for a more just and equal world. We see that with Christian Aid, and we see it with groups such as Musawa, Sisters in Islam, women who are living under Muslim laws, organizations that are advocating for gender equality. We believe that faith organizations can also help to combat stigma, transmit vital information, uncomfortable often, advocate peace and build social cohesion, often in the most difficult of circumstances. That role is critical when it comes to gender and climate. Faith organizations can help to galvanize action locally and nationally with all stakeholders. And let us remember that those stakeholders are so diverse from every walk of life, whether we talked about the aged or we talk about those with disabilities, young children, women and girls, men and leaders, traditional rulers. They can all use their voice to hold the powerful to account. They can bring a message of climate justice and gender equality to communities around the world, and they can support the action that is needed. They can reach some of the most vulnerable people hit by the climate crisis and support communities devastated by violent extremes of weather. And in times of gender and difficulty, they can provide solace and hope that one can live to fight another day. Friends, the injustices we face are stark, but by tackling climate and gender justice together, we can build a better world for all of us. We have huge constituencies in our countries, especially our developing countries, in which we can galvanize the movements to make a difference. And so here I stand calling you to action, that we may shape a better future where all women can live a life of dignity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please, another round of applause for the DSG. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to see so many people gathered here today. My name is Osai Ojigo. I'm the Policy and Campaigns Director at Christian Aid. I would like to kickstart our conversation this evening by going to the root of the DSG's speech this evening. You really spoke about women leadership and the initiatives that are ongoing in the climate space. I would like you to delve a bit deeper by sharing for us how can we ensure that climate policies and initiatives are not only gender sensitive, but also inclusive of all voices and experiences. It's dismal, isn't it, the kinds of limited funding that feminist organizations and women are having to tackle with in trying to handle the issues of climate adaptation and mitigation. So if you could share a little bit more about what we could be doing.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Just wondering if this mic works. It's, you know, for a very long time, we have spoken about participatory planning and the inclusion of people right from the very beginning. And it has eluded us in many cases because we are seeing that the results of many of the designs that we've had have failed the most vulnerable. They failed to get ahead of much of the climate crisis. And I think that we have a lot more work to do then, not to design your solution that, yes, has science and evidence behind it and data, and then take it to the community and say, well, what do you think of this? And in a 2-hour session, try to convince them that this is the right way and try to implement it. We have to take that longer road. No? Okay. Something happened. Here, maybe I should just come down. Okay, great. We have to take the time to put quality back in our processes. You have to ask who's around the table in the context in which you want to have those designs, and then you have to put a set of metrics there that measures how we're doing with this. And this is often two separate exercises that happen in many, whether it's in civil society or the UN itself, that often the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. There is a division of labor from the process that you have to design a program, to the implementation, and to really seeing what have we learned from it and how can we scale that up as we go.
Thank you. You mentioned faith in your speech, so that was music to my ears. Faith is a major element of the social and political context in which Christian Aid works, and many of the countries where we are implementing our projects and programs. However, despite the fact that faith plays such a strong element in our work, we sometimes struggle with the development aspect of it. How are we using our faith to ensure that our work with religious groups and institutions are felt in country, but also more importantly, how we use faith to tackle poverty? Could you share examples of how you see this working well, or where it can also be a challenge in delivering on development initiatives?
Maybe just to say, at least for my country, Nigeria, one of the biggest constituencies is that of faith, whether it is Islam, Christianity, or otherwise. And we've profited from those congregations because they've been engaged. And you often find that the capacity in those congregations, beyond the faith that they hold, that they come to worship, is one in their day-to-day lives, the workplace, how to bring these challenges to a workplace. So, for example, we were able to bring that in one part of our country as we try to implement the MDGs to a group of bankers. And the entry point was the church. And this was a sermon that was being given about access to finance and livelihoods for widows. And at that point in time, there was no access for them to banks, to institutional financial institutions to do this. And it was from that discussion that we opened up policies in the central bank, that in agriculture they were able to participate in. I don't think we would have had that had we not taken opportunity of that gathering. So maximizing the congregations you see around you. Another example is, you'll all know the tragedy of girls in Afghanistan who've had their education taken away from them. And most recently, in the struggle to try to bring the Taliban to the table to give these rights back to girls and to women in Afghanistan, we were able to put together, after a lot of, you'd think that it was a no-brainer to bring people together on this issue, but it was very hard, and it happened last week in Saudi Arabia. There was a Women in Islam conference, and really the message where all the clerics came, including from the Taliban, to show how they had really not interpreted the religion with respect to women's education, and that these were all of the hadith and of the sayings in the Quran that allowed us to have not only education, but livelihoods. And I think here we had huge uptake from men and from women, and from many governments that you would not have imagined would have said so, sitting to have those conversations with the Taliban. Today we see more financing now go in from many NGOs, INGOs, to Afghanistan to improve upon the education.
Thank you so much. So I'll ask one more question, and then I'm going to come to the audience. And please, you would note that there's a microphone right in the middle of the aisle here. So if you have a question, please find your position by the mic. So 1945 is a pivotal year. It was the year the UN was established. It's also the year that Christian Aid was established. So as we approach the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, how does it continue to meet its objectives as defined by the UN Charter to maintain peace, protect human rights, uphold international law, and promote development and humanitarian support? What do you see as the role for the UN during these turbulent times?
Yes, we are being stressed, and this year is also the 75th year that we celebrate human rights, and with the regression, that's not a celebration, it's going to be, we commemorate what we promised in the Charter. 2 years ago, as we became 75 at the UN, the Secretary General was asked to give a reflection of that. Clearly, 75 years later, we are not fit for the purpose that we were designed. We see many of our organs failing, the Security Council being paralyzed by not being able to take the decisions it should. The veto that was given was one of responsibility to act so that there are no more wars, there is no more conflict. That has been clearly stressed, and we are seeing more conflicts and more wars where we least expected them, Ukraine, and today in Israel and Gaza. So we have to reflect on that, and what we have now is our common agenda. We have a summit of the future that recognizes both the institution itself must be, I would say there's a rebirthing to be had. The mindsets, the skills, the institutional structures that we have need to be thought through. The young population that we have, largest cohort, but technology that is available to us that was not available before to help us make the decisions. Perhaps we ought to look at the way we govern. The social contract itself is breaking in many places. Social fabric is being torn. So we need to have a look at not democracy, I believe that people believe in the values of democracy, but perhaps the models, and what are those checks and balances that are needed to reinforce that contract between those that are governed and being governed. So with the, watch the space, join the space for the the UN that comes together in the Summit of the Future next year. And it will focus on that digital space. For us, it's the biggest change that we have. It is an enormous opportunity and potential, but it doesn't have any guardrails. And so many people suffer from the dark side of it. And that crowds out the potentials of technology. And that's something we hope to negotiate. We no longer have a peace agenda in the United Nations that is effective. We see many of our missions being asked to leave. And they were designed in 1945. Yeah. So for us today, what should that look like? More prevention, more mediation, trying to head off the conflict before it comes and looking at those huge issues around root causes. And third, perhaps to be a more equal world is to think about the way the international financial architecture was designed those years ago. It doesn't work today. As we said, it's not accessible. I don't believe emerging markets or many developing countries are asking for charity. They're asking for an opportunity to invest in their economies and their people. It's not accessible. It's designed in a way where the richer economies today still deny those with a bigger economy the governance and the representation in the financial architecture. So these three spaces will be important, and they will all play out with ensuring a more equal world, one that we live without fear and that there is more unity and solidarity and hope for a life of dignity.
Thank you. A life of dignity, that's the future that we want to have for everyone. Thank you so much. I would now like to open the floor for questions from you, the audience. Please keep your questions brief, one sentence that ends with a question mark, and so that we can get as many people to also ask their questions. I'll take a couple to give space for the UN Deputy Secretary General to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I work in artificial intelligence and have built a tool that thousands of business owners are using currently, and have been wrestling with the idea of how we can use emerging technologies to lessen the gap of social inequality. I wondered, just with you mentioning about technology there at the end of your last answer, what some of the key opportunities you think are for doing work when it comes to climate change and inequality in the space of technology, and particularly around tech and AI.
Thank you. Maybe you should also tell your name so that she knows.
Oh, sorry. My name is Maneksha Stewart.
Thank you. Next, please.
Thank you for your talk. My name is Brian Ikapoor. I'm from the IMOS Foundation. It always puzzles me in these talks on climate that people never mention population. Are you able to throw any light on the effect of the increasing population on the climate crisis?
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Phyllis Santamaria from St. Martin's, and also the founder-director of the Financial Inclusion Forum here in the UK. And I would like to know how the UN is reinforcing its work with financial inclusion. We had the UN year in 2005 for microcredit, and I think that there's urgent action needed for reinforcing this sector.
Thank you. We can take a few more. Yeah. Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Rachel Carnegie from the Anglican Alliance. I'd really value your commenting on the evolving context of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular to comment on the role of women in their delivery. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Benjamin. I'm here more about the war that's going on in the Middle East, in Israel. Muslims believe that when you fight in a war against a non-believer, you go to heaven, and you get 72 virgins. Christians and Jews, we don't believe that. We believe in life. And during the IDF operation, Bring Them Home campaign that is going on, they discovered that many of Hamas terrorist organizations were operating in buildings that was also UN and World Health Organization buildings. That means they work together. I've always said that the United Nations is a terrorist organization that was set up to oppress Africans and prevent Jews from going home. My only question is, can the United Nations ask Hamas to release the hostages? Because those hostages don't believe that they're going to heaven if they die in this operation. Thank you. And climate change is a scam. It was designed to impoverish the West and to enrich China and the Middle East. And it's becoming a disaster. They don't know what they're doing with it. Everybody knows that. Even the kids at home these days knows that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership and your lecture tonight. My name's Alison Marshall from Age International. Climate change and population aging are defining trends of our times. By 2050, older people will be over a fifth of the world's population. So my question is, how can we get decision makers to plan climate action in the context of and in tandem with responding to population aging? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Emma Wheeler, ex-science teacher. We support Just Stop Oil because of our deep concerns that Britain's new gas and oil licenses will accelerate the destruction. What are your views on Britain's new gas and oil licenses and Just Stop Oil?
Okay. So, yes.
Good evening. My name is Marguerite Ohan. I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about the intersection between faith and climate action. So I was wondering how you think faith organizations can best advocate for climate action, and how can the UN support this work?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I don't know whether we have any questions online. If we do, please do alert us. So I think you have a mix of questions there, some UN specific, some around climate change, intersection with faith, women leadership. And then, of course, we sometimes don't talk about growing old and older persons and how this world is prepared for supporting that.
Grandmothers like me. Okay, be careful what you ask for. You might get a whole lot of questions here that are really helpful. Let me just say, whatever question that I get, it is a reflection from the world that we serve. And that's okay, because it is so diverse, and we don't always have the answers to those questions, but we do take them away with us, and we do try to bring them back into the system. As Patrick said, I am chair of the UN Development System, which is over 40 agencies, funds, and programs, and many of these questions I take back to them. But let me start with the faith and what faith can do to advocate for development. Again, faith is not in a silo. It's every one of us here that is throughout life. You wake up in the morning, you go to your job or your constituency and participate. And I think that we need to find more ways of having discussions like this in places of faith. It can be in a church, it can be in a mosque, it can be anywhere. And I think that, have a division of labor where we really think constructively how to involve the faith-based organizations, the churches themselves, and otherwise in this work. I think that when we have many stakeholder meetings, you're missing from the table. We, generally speaking, go to either the government and sector that is responsible, or perhaps the private sector that is one where one is seeing the market and therefore wants their participation, or NGOs that are specific to gender or health or education. And I think that we can begin we do, but we need to do more of it, because what we don't have in many of the siloed representations that we have in faith is the diversity. And you just don't know where that solution's coming from or where you're going to leverage the idea or the resources from. So really much more interaction in the process of engaging stakeholders as we go. In other words, look for them. But I think that faith can also look for us. Convening is what the UN does. And I think by convening for some of these issues, co-convening together with us is important, because we can bring together, as they say, strange bedfellows in a room that need to address a solution we might not always agree about, come from different perspectives, but can find those solutions in that. Again, I will say that, by and large, those that we find in our faith-based communities and institutions are diverse. The question to the aging of the population, I think, is a very important one. We've been talking about the huge cohort of young people, and we're worried about that because it's the future and it's theirs, and they need to be involved in it. But as we are seeing better health and we are living longer, we're retiring at maybe in our institution 65. By the grace of God and good health, you may go on to 85. What are you going to do for 20 years? That's a whole career. And someone's going to tell you, here's your pension, off you go. And what are you going to do? So I think for us, we have been thinking about the life cycle, women, and diversity. Conceptually, to see the whole of that life cycle from the beginning to the end, and the role that you play in society, and as added value to society. And I think that when we think about older people, you find that the experiences, the lived experiences, the expertise that they bring, but also at a level and space where the local level will gain much more from that. So I almost see it as you go through the whole life cycle, you come back, and you're fertilizing again the foundations of our societies, of our communities, of the knowledge that's needed to make better decisions and to keep one together. So not to see it again in silos, but to see the whole cycle. Same with women. I mean, with women, we know that half the population is not being taken along as it should be. And so to factor that in as well, half of those that are aged, half of the young people, we need to think about women more as an integral partner to shaping futures. And of course, then diversity. This is something that we all struggle with. Our world is so much more connected, but it seems that we have become more intolerant. It seems that we have become less caring about your neighbor, which I think all faiths teaches you not to go too far, but, love thy neighbor. And we're not doing that. And so I think in diversity, we need to see it as a strength and not as a weakness. And the threads of our human fabric is what, in fact, we can gain much more from in terms of peace, in terms of tolerance, in the aspirations we look for. And that diversity question has to be a question that we all ask ourselves. In our community, as we said with the SDGs, leave no one behind. Who is your community? Who is your society? And how do you take everyone's needs and rights with no discrimination and bring them in to the family as we should. On the gas and oil concessions, this is probably where the diplomat in me disappears. We freeze them. You have to put them back in the freezer. To have concessions of oil and gas today when the science tells us that we are already in a world that is 2.3 degrees and we need to be 1.5, see what is happening around the world, just does not make business sense. We're fortunate that we have the new foreign minister, who was actually one of the co-chairs for the SDGs. He has a hill to climb because he's coming into a space which is fraught with the fear of what had happened, and it's perfectly understandable. Russia going into Ukraine in 2022 was something we never expected. The last place we thought that we would have a spanner thrown at the charter. And it did show us that dependency is not a good place to be, so we understand energy security. But it cannot be off the back of humanity. There has to be an answer to that, and there is, and perhaps this is something that COP will also come to conclusions with. And I hope that the UK will attend COP. I hope its leadership will attend COP. It is important that they are there. They have shown leadership in Glasgow. They showed leadership in Sharm el-Sheikh. The global stocktake that signals what we do in the next 5 years must have them at the table. They are an important player and they need to lead. In the questions that we had about, I think it was, didn't quite get the second part of the question, but certainly on the jihad and the UN working together with Hamas. I just can tell you that 107 colleagues of mine have died committing their lives to saving children and women and men in Gaza. And that as far as I have known, my colleagues are not terrorists. They came to the UN to serve, and serve they did, and in many cases have lost their lives. What we have in Israel and Palestine is not new. There is a history to it. And politicians and leaders have to come back to the table of peace. And the only thing I will say is that missing from that table of peace in the past, which is probably why we never made it, is women. And women have to be back at that table together with them. And it takes me to goal 5 of our SDGs and how we're doing with gender and the SDGs. This is exactly it. And it's not a box-ticking exercise. It is not a silo. It is for us to know that we are partners, not asking for women to take over men. We're asking you to shift so that we can take the other half of the space, so that we are more... I often say that men, you go straight for the door, you don't look left, you don't look right. And women look left and right and bring everyone along. So together we both have a role to play. We'll go fast and straight, but we'll take everybody with us. And we find, I listen to men speaking in the UN on the conflicts that we have. It's a conversation that is generally about winning a war. There is no war that is ever won. People lose wars because they lose women, they lose children, they lose men. But women, when they come to the table, they talk about the pathways to peace, because they know what it is to hold a peaceful community, the value of peace in their home, the value of peace in their communities. So on that question of the SDGs, it is goal 5 being the docking station for every investment that we make on the other 16, that the outcome should be seen in the lives of women and their contribution to their societies, to their communities and to the world at large. We're not there yet. The struggle still continues, and it will be a better world when we finally get there, 2030. And then the financial inclusion. Microcredit, it did, again, I think the narrative of investing in development has been lost by keeping it very much to what overseas development assistance has done. Let me give you an example. In Africa last year, African governments spent $700 billion on development. ODA was about 73. And the conversation was about 73 and its decline. It should have been about 700 billion and leveraging it for better governance, for more money and people's lives. And that's what we want to change, is to get that, use that 72 to leverage more of the 700, so we do have enough resources for everyone. And it is, financial inclusion should be a major part of the policy decisions that we make in every country. And this is where we see some progress, particularly as we are looking at the digital transitions. As that is happening, don't leave women behind. The digital literacy that we need and the connection, we see financial inclusion. You'll see that China, as large as it is, it's cashless. And for that to happen, they had to have a level of digital literacy. Now, we can say there's a dark side to that because there's a digital footprint, but that's why we want the digital compact that protects everyone. But financial inclusion, this is a major part of what we would like to see, both the poor, men and women, but especially women, as we see them being left behind. The population dynamics, so sorry I didn't speak about that. I spoke about that at the climate, at the Food Systems Summit. It's a big part of what we see as root causes to conflict, where we see the tensions now. Populations are growing. There's not sufficient education or investments and rights of women so that the population issues are addressed properly. There's not enough information. I remember not long ago the president of Niger talking about the population rates there. They were incompatible with the growth of their economy. They would never be able to get past a space where every citizen would have that education, the right to health, if they didn't take hold of the population issues. It's a very big issue. We are growing faster than we should. And it is important that we recognize these dynamics in security, food security for one. We are seeing urbanization happening at a rate that will put us 72, 73% by 2050 in cities. More food is needed. The farmer-herder clashes that we hear about, these are the dynamics where you see the tensions for land and food, urban and rural. But they are a major part of the work that now UNFPA and the UN has taken up and across all the sectors, showing better. And I think here there was the question, I'm working my way back to AI. It's such an important tool that we've got, because the predictive analysis that you can do, the scenarios that you can do now in record time really help decision making, but they also help make a case where we were not able to do so as effectively before. And this applies to population, is that you can do the scenarios for that to show those in decision making. If you take these policy decisions, these are the scenarios. If you don't, these are the implications. The same with climate. Being able to show the scenarios using AI of what would happen in the next 10 years, because the melting of the glaciers and climate change is happening so fast, the economic implications for it. I remember telling some of the leaders in my country that, well, you know, we're going to get climate migrants in my country, because at the rate of the sea level rise, we're going to lose one state. And we lose that one state, where do they go? They will have to go north, but as they go north, they lose. To lose a state, to lose where you come from, your family, your history, your identity, is something, again, that helps us to advocate for this, and really important. But AI, we do have a high-level panel right now in place, because, as I said, there's some things we just don't know. What we do know is moving faster than we are. We talk about that with AI right now. Quantum computing is going to be another space where it's phenomenal. I mean, we have not even got our head around that yet. But we hope that this high-level panel, and this is what the UN is incredible at, convening. But that convening has to discuss the issues and come out with something that we can implement. And so we convene a lot. We have loads of resolutions, and we have treaties, and we take them out to the world. Some work. Some take a few years, and the Child's Right Convention took a while to get acts in every country that complied with the convention, but it happened. And so I think now, using AI, the potentials of AI, to really speed up the processes with a sense of urgency that we must all have, and the scale of which we have to do things across the silos that we have been designed around for decades, needs to happen.
Thank you so much. We have one more person that wants to ask a question pretty quickly, and she's stood out for some time.
It's wonderful to hear you. We work on gender rights, we call Women's UN Report Network, and currently working on the Green Deal. What do you see as the biggest impacts from COVID, and what are the key areas to tackle them? And do you see a north and south divide post-COVID and currently as we are witnessing what's happening in the world? So maybe two questions. Thank you.
So, yes, you may.
Hello. Oh shit, that was really
loud. now everyone else is coming up. Okay, you come up. Just 1 minute, and then we'll close. So you'll be the last.
Okay, all right. I'm looking for your wise words. So my first one is, what do we do when we feel like we've lost our voice? At this moment in time, I feel anyway, that we've got a government in place which is not listening to us. So everybody claps when you talk about not having fossil fuels and everything, but the governments are making decisions which completely seem to be opposite to what we are feeling on the ground. And my second one is about generational trauma. So how do we deal with that, with any issue, including climate? So how do you deal with a person who's been oppressed and the oppressor, and how do we help them through that journey? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for everything that you do. I was posed a question very similar to the first part of that question earlier today. So I took part in a Just Stop Oil march, which started from Trafalgar Square earlier today, and before we began, I was surrounded by about 20 school children who had come to London, and then they saw this protest and they asked me, what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I said, well, we have a pretty toxic relationship with nature, and one of those is, manifested in the burning of fossil fuels. But I also said that I was here because this is actually effective. It could be effective. And I'm sure you're aware of the example in the Netherlands recently in the past few months where for 27 days, people of the Netherlands engaged in a very similar act for 27 days. It included 9,000 arrests. But at the end of that, the Dutch Parliament are now putting forward proposals to stop subsidising fossil fuels. And you talked about subsidising fossil fuels, you talked about consents and licenses. And I think, for me, at this time, I'd be interested in that notion of what is effective. And I was at COP26, and I suppose we can reflect that on some measure at least, the COPs have not been an effective process. And so at this time of real urgency, surely we have to focus on what we believe is or could be effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I come back.
Yeah, three big questions. I think on the climate and the green transitions that we need to make, women in the green transitions, a lot of this is going to be about how we move forward investing in those transitions and being really specific about them. For us, I speak now to the food transitions. Our food systems have to transform, but they won't transform if we're not connected and if we don't have power. And in all of those are investments. And the money that is available in this world today, it's like the food available. If you had a distribution of it, you wouldn't go hungry, and there would be resources to invest in a life of dignity, a life of rights. And I think it's important for us to really try to speak to that in the multilateral system, but also, again, hone in on the players that frankly have a responsibility. Example I always use is on climate action. For years through the climate negotiations, we talked to our 190 odd countries. But actually we need to talk to 20. They're in the G20. And we need to focus on that. And we need to look at those emissions, and we need to see, yes, China has got the highest emissions in the world today, but per capita, the footprint is in the US. And we need to think about that, because this is about two different standards of life. And consumption. Is it a consumption that we need off the back of others who have none? We have to ask ourselves about these tough questions about how we live, and if it's okay for others to take the brunt of it because of the way we want to live. And this is not what we need, this is what we want. And wants are never exhausted. But what do we need in a world that should be more balanced, that at least someone should have the chance to be able to have drinking water for the year, that on the other hand is what it takes to produce a pair of jeans. And we have maybe 6 pair of jeans, can we have 1? We have to think about the impact and the implications to that. And the more we speak about that, the less technical it is, the less distant it is from us, because we need today in the world that we have to all be uncomfortable. I mean, I'm often told that our speeches are a little too miserable. It's the reality. The reality is not good. Or they'll say to me, Amina, you're not smiling. How can I smile with that speech that is talking about so much of a reality that really people are suffering? What I can do is smile at the end when I talk to you about the SDGs and the potentials and how we can all get together to do it. And that brings me to when we talk about how do we have these movements happen? How can we make the change that we need to make, our voice, the lost voice? There are 2 things here. First, people, because of technology, I guess we're activists, we're a different kind of activists, right? Mm-hmm. We're not quite sure about it. I mean, I can't understand why my kids won't go out and march. Maybe they march online, I don't know. But I march outside in the street, and that's what I've known to do, make a lot of noise until government says, can you just keep quiet and come in and tell us how it's done? And then I'm keeping one hand out, holding on to Patrick, and saying, don't let me be assimilated into government and hold me true to what I am. So I think that we have to remind people that since time immemorial, we have fought for things that we need in terms of justice for people. It's always been fought for. In the faith, I mean, you go through our prophets. I mean, what did they not sacrifice? Huh? They sacrificed their lives for us. Yeah. And now we are saying that it's too difficult. And we become, as the Pope said, one of the most dangerous things that could happen to us is that we are engulfed by the globalization of indifference. And I hope that that doesn't happen to us, because if that does, we are in real trouble. We are in real trouble. We should never get to that space. We have to continue standing up and standing on the shoulders of others. I mean, I talked about Wangari Maathai, late Wangari Maathai. I mean, we have to stand on her shoulders for climate justice. We picked a fight with nature, and it's fighting back. We have to make peace with nature now. And to make peace, we stand on her shoulders, because she went out there and she was an activist, and it didn't take 6 months or 6 days. It took years. And so when we understand that there are parts of our community who do this, who go out there and are activists for this, we should support them. When we see international NGOs like Christian Aid, national NGOs, CBOs, we need to support them, because they are the voice of the issues. It brings me to the voice of the people. The voice of the people in a well-oiled democracy. And let's say today, I'm not sure where there is one that is working, because I'm seeing many, many people questioning their leaders. The street speaks today on several issues, and it's disconnected from the leadership. So there is one thing, is that maybe the leadership's not listening. Some of you might ask, well, you know, how did we put that person in office? Maybe you didn't. Maybe you didn't vote. Because when we look at the demographics of the voting today, first we're seeing the lowest turnout of voting in most elections across the world. It's not just in Africa. It is across the world. People aren't going to vote because they don't believe anything will change. And then when they do vote, young people aren't voting. So there's a disconnect between us and those that are governing, and I think we need to call that out. The voice of people needs to be taken to our parliaments. When we have a problem in most of our countries, we go to the Prime Minister's office or the President's office. We need to go to the parliaments. They shouldn't be sitting there if they're not delivering on their promises. They represent our issues and the people that they serve. It has to come back to that. The politics today, as I will say, in most cases, diplomacy, is costing lives. It's causing climate change. And so we have to get back to that space where we, the people, in the Charter, we, the people, call our leaders to account. It is not the UN system, the Secretary General, that can march into the Security Council and tell those 5 veto holders that you have to behave and you have to vote for humanity in the Charter. It is the parliaments of those countries that need to say, you go give us the vote that we need to stop this conflict, to make this right, because that's in fact what you were employed to do. That's a difficult one, because frankly, democracy now is becoming a work in progress for everyone. It's no longer just the domain of African leaders and despots that we heard about. We have them all over the place. And we need to stand up and say, it is not right that you sit in a position of leadership. You have a responsibility to lead. And my Secretary General will often say to me, well, I won't, he's going to put him in trouble now. He will often say to me that, you know, where there is leadership, there's no power. And where there is power, there is no leadership. And that's what we're facing today. So can we, the people, make the change? I believe we can. We've done it before, and we can do it again. And I think that we have the tools, we have the frameworks, and we have the faith, the abiding faith to know what is right and what is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would now like to invite the CEO of Christian Aid, Patrick Watt, my own boss, to come and give us some closing remarks. Patrick, over to you.
Thanks, Osa. I'll keep it very brief. But I mean, first of all, and most importantly, just on behalf of Christian Aid, I'd like to thank the Deputy Secretary General for a really challenging and inspiring and timely lecture. And I hope that it spurs us not just to thinking further about these issues, but acting on them. And doubtless it will provoke further thought and action in the weeks to come. I want to thank her also for being a good friend of Christian Aid. So my predecessor, Amanda McQuashy, who is here in the audience this evening, hosted Amina at our London office back in 2018. So it's been particularly good to invite Amina back to deliver this evening's lecture. I also want to thank Sam and Richard and others at St. Martin in the Fields for hosting us and for all the work that goes into making an event like this run smoothly. And I want to thank all of you, the audience, for coming out on a dark November evening and participating and asking good questions. So Christian Aid is an organisation that is supported by 41 sponsoring churches, 41 denominations. And we really seek to put partnership at the heart of everything we do. So, of course, our work is just one contribution to a much larger movement for justice and against poverty. So I look forward to continuing to work with many of you here tonight in different ways to advance our common agenda for justice against poverty. And if you have ideas about how we can collaborate better, please do feel free to speak to me or any other Christian Aid colleagues. Lots of them are wearing bright red t-shirts after the event. And if you would like to contribute financially, you knew there was a sting coming, didn't you? If you would like to contribute financially towards our work, there is an opportunity to donate as you leave the church. So thank you if that's something you feel able to do. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Sam for the last word.
Well, the first thing to say is this series of 9 lectures would not have taken place without the Education Committee at St. Martin's, and particularly Richard Carter, and I'd like to ask you to thank Richard and that committee now, please, for everything they've done. You are all invited downstairs for a reception after this event. Please do continue the conversation. And thank you for everyone who's made this such a remarkable 9-lecture series. We've heard passion, we've heard conviction, we've heard insight and perception, and tonight has been right up there at the very top with the very best of the 9. I'd just like to reflect with you for a couple of moments on what we've heard tonight. I found myself asking myself this question: how do you become Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations? And not having met the current post holder, Amina, if I may call you that, until tonight, I didn't know the answer to that question. I think I've got a lot further. Don't worry, I'm not leaving St. Martin's. A lot further with the answer to that question. I think what you need to be is a person who doesn't just talk about dignity but embodies it. I think you need to be a person that doesn't use... I was interested in how few times we heard the familiar words peace and justice. We heard the words a bit down further into the granular detail of what makes those wonderful things, those pious things, possible. In other words, we heard somebody who's done the hard yards and sat in rooms and sat in lecture rooms and sat behind computers and sat and negotiated and done all of those things to make those things a reality. But beyond dignity and sheer hard yards, I think we saw a couple of other things tonight. We saw integrity. I don't think, Amina, there's any danger you've turned into a politician. I didn't see any danger of that happening tonight or any other night, frankly. And most of all, with all that collaboration, all that togetherness, and all that wisdom of partnership, of listening to so many diverse people like we had tonight, we saw what really makes you a Deputy Secretary General tonight, and we saw wisdom. And it's a memorable and profound thing to witness wisdom. We've done that tonight, and it makes a fitting conclusion to the series, because the series is about wisdom, but also about the integrity of the person who follows their convictions to the very end. And that's what we've enjoyed together tonight. And while none of the things we've talked about tonight have been fun, all of them have made us reflect deeply on where we stand, which is the reason we set up the lecture series in the first place. Thanks for being part of it.